Hello, this is Lisa Lee and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to hang out a little bit. I was getting ready to start the day. I've made my coffee. I was getting ready to journal. I'm still in my pajamas. It's actually early morning right now. And I got this overwhelming sensation. And I was talking to my guides and they kind of showed me this, they like hearkened my memory back to, or like brought my attention to, like either it was a TikTok or YouTube, it's like somewhere along the line I caught something that was talking about like the impact of trauma, and that when you go through something that is traumatic, the traumatic event itself is not necessarily like an indicator of how intense that traumatic experience will be. What's a bigger indicator, I'm saying this wrong, but like when a traumatic event occurs, the biggest indicator of whether or not that traumatic event is going to be life-altering or just a breeze in the wind is whether or not somebody was there, whether or not you had somebody there with you, whether or not you were alone, like with whatever it meant to hold this trauma, experience this trauma, and move through this trauma. And so I you know, my guides showed me that or brought my memory to that place, and then just said to me, you know, the loneliness epidemic. You know, there's a very deep bruise in humanity right now that is just getting impossible to ignore. And the loneliness epidemic is interesting because there's like a lot of shame around it. You know, I think people get really, really ashamed when we think about, you know, what it is to like feel lonely, find yourself lonely. A lot of times it like rings like, you know, failed at life bells and things like that. And it's funny to me because when I every single person whose cards I've ever looked at since the beginning of time, or just whose ever psychic space I've interacted with in any way, I see the same loneliness. Like, I mean, it's not like anybody is spared, because people don't have genuine connections. They don't know how to genuinely connect. They don't even know how to genuinely connect with themselves. So that abyss, that feeling of alienation, is something that everyone carries with them as almost like a touchstone, because of just even the way that we're born. And so, you know, when we talk about loneliness, I first want to kind of like bring you out of it a little bit and look at the fact that, you know, we are lonely, like in this world, this worldview, the worldview that is a, you know, for better or for worse, we live under the tyranny of our war god. I'm gonna have a little sip of my coffee. If you have to compete, you're lonely. If you live in a competitive society, you're lonely. If that competitive society is one that participates in wars, you are suspicious and fearful. You know, so these are just things that I want to like take it away from like the personal responsibility place and put it more in the like, let's do something with this kind of a place. And so, you know, I walked into my office, I put my coffee down, I put my journal down, because, you know, when we go into this topic with our guides, because our guides really want to minister to this notion of like coping with loneliness. When we go into this topic with our guides, you know, I just figure like, let's do it together. Let's not be alone. You know what I mean? So like, so I'm having my coffee with you, you know, this is my journal. You know, this is not a, you know, reading where I'm like ready to go. This is something that we're going to kind of meander into a little bit, because I just want to be with you. And I think that, you know, the entertainment value of this is going to be poopy, you know, for people who are looking to be entertained. But for those of you that find this and you just want a touchstone, you know, something in the world that you can kind of like, you know, like that you can feel the presence of others, because I want us to go into this space of the presence of others, like very specifically in this reading. And I want to talk about like a little bit about what that means. And so I encourage you to maybe pause this, go get yourself a cup of coffee or some water, maybe get a journal, you know, grab a cozy blanket. What we're doing with this reading is partly doing a reading, and partly we're going to hang out, you know, we're going to spend some time. So I'm going to have another sip of my coffee. I'm going to walk you through my morning routine a little bit, my like morning meditation routine. And if it's hard for you to sort of meditate in the mornings, like you can always take this this video and just like, you know, get yourself like to that point where you're ready to meditate with somebody else. We can do this together. You can use this as a tool. So, you know, let's have our morning coffee. You know, like let's think about this is like, let's have our morning coffee. Let's have our journal here, and let's, you know, intend to connect with our guides And then also intend to connect with our guides over this issue of what it means to overcome loneliness. So I have a candle here, and with this candle, we're going to do a little bit of magic. I want you to take some really deep breaths into wherever you can locate yourself in your own body. And I want you to expand that space. And with every exhale, I want you just to release just whatever is not you. I want that to kind of be the intention, so that you're entering the space, you know, in that pure place of self. And then I want you to set the intention with your guides, with the god or goddesses, or, you know, whatever deity you feel comfortable with, to connect with my highest self and to connect with your highest self, and then to come into a space of communing. And beyond time and beyond space, without forming any kind of entanglements, we enter into a gentle communing. And we allow our ascended ancestors and our ascended guides to participate in facilitating this gathering. And so with that intention, we step into this space. And we talk a little bit about safety. In a sacred space, we honor each other as divine. You know, in that sacred space, as we honor each other as divine, we honor and respect. Like this is a sacred space. There's some reason why our guides want to bring this through, because I think like one of the scariest things about loneliness, because I felt like a pinch of fear, which is why I kind of, you know, said that thing about like, you know, we enter the space and we respect each other's boundaries. Like we enter this space and we respect each other's sanctity. You know, we enter this space and we see each other's divinity. And I think the reason that is coming through in that way is because our guides are saying, you know, people do not connect anymore because they're afraid of each other. We're fundamentally terrified of each other. We do not feel safe around each other. And so, you know, one of the things that I want to do with this reading, this card, Courage, when I came into my office, this was on the floor. Sometimes my cats will knock things over, and this just was like a lone card by itself on the floor. And so I want to talk about this courage. You know, I want to talk about like the ways that other people are terrifying. You know, this is how we're going to enter this space with our guides. And, you know, one of the first things that we're going to give ourselves in the way of prompt is being really honest, like going into this space around this notion of loneliness and not thinking about like, you know, the lack of third spaces or, you know, the ways that those cliques are toxic or, you know, how people are competitive and it's all the empire's fault. Like I want us to start with like a very basic acknowledgement and a place of acceptance in that acknowledgement, because when we acknowledge something true and we can accept it, there can be a peace that comes with knowing that like from that place now problems can be solved. Before we acknowledge it, you know, it's anxiety. That's what its name is. It just operates as anxiety. But once we're able to acknowledge that truth, we can begin to move with it. And so this notion of like, I am afraid of others, I think we're going to start there. And so, you know, usually with a regular reading, I'll sort of like clear myself out of it. But since this is my prayer time too, you know, and I also am afraid of people, like we have this, we're on the same page. Like I'm terrified. I don't look it, and there's very few things that, I think that like, let's have a moment here. You know, I'm not terrified of anything or anyone in any way, shape, form, like, you know, end stop period. You can throw me in any room and I will find a way to like, you know, feel on top of that situation. You know, I walk with a confidence and a bravado that like, you know, like says as much, and that comes from, that's earned, you know, that is earned. But, you know, that's true. At the same time, I fear every, you know, person, you know, and so I think that like when we talk about this notion of like I am afraid of others, we need to be able to hold something in the hand, like our hand, like two things in the same hand, without having to like, you know, own either one of them as like the certain truth. Like you can simultaneously be very well adept at defending yourself. You can be very well adept at, you know, staking your claim. You can be very well adept at showing up in the world. You can speak very eloquently. But that doesn't mean that you feel safe emotionally with others. And so when we sort of admit like, okay, I'm afraid of others, like part of this loneliness epidemic is not being able to like speak properly. Part of this loneliness epidemic is just like a profound fear of others. So let's get some cards on the table and just see what our guides want to kind of say to that. Because we're talking about it, right? Let's take a look. I've been in a loneliness epidemic since like the first grade, just because for me, I just don't find that there are many people that I identify with, and those that I do identify with, often, I don't feel comfortable with, for one reason or another. I was, I'm going to pause to drink my coffee because this is definitely not high production quality. This is like a little conversation. I was thinking about something along the lines of like complex post-traumatic stress syndrome and post-traumatic stress syndrome, and how people who, are afflicted in this way understand that like there's this part of it. I always say like the lettering, like PTSD, like pissed, you know what I mean? Like pissed, so there's this way in which like, we all operate around, trying to cope with the trauma of this world and this existence in different ways. And so I know for myself, I have all these coping mechanisms that like keep me at some distance from others. And one of those things is, when we go back to the place where this reading started, it started on this notion of like, when the trauma occurs and there's no one there with you to share, to hold space and help share that experience with you in one way or another. It doesn't mean that you have to bring somebody else into your pain and like hand it to them. There's a way in which we can minister to each other and not, have a trauma dumping kind of that's a nonsense phrase anyway. So I think that when we think about the ways in which, if that trauma occurs and there is no person there, and it impacts that trauma and makes it 1,000 times worse and causes something like post-traumatic stress syndrome, or causes something like complex post-traumatic stress syndrome, then what you have is like an operating system, that operates to keep you from connection in one way or another. Because, for me personally, how I manage like severe CPTSD is I keep a little bit of crisis on hand at all times so that I never am out of that place of hypervigilance completely. And that's, and any like psychologist or psychiatrist that you talk to is going to say like, that's super unhealthy. But I know that, from knowing veterans, like I know from knowing people who understand what it is to spend long periods of times, like in an excess of decades in types of war zone. And on my Patreon, we're talking a lot about this notion of a war god. And like, we are in a world that is a war zone. And so, we all have this soldier's kind of a mentality of, one hand out in greeting and another hand on the sword. And so when we talk about, the ways in which we kind of have this programming that keep us, at a distance from each other, these coping mechanisms, it's in absence of the caring friend. It's in absence of the stable family. It's in absence of the people that you thought and expected to be capable of, helping that failed, all of those things. With this time to rest for a while in this healing and the beneath opens up to us. Like for me, I keep retriggering my like core trauma in order to not ever have to sit with the healing process of, oh my God, what did I just go through? What did I just endure? What did I just have to live through? What did I just experience? Like, in order to keep that distance, that soldier's distance, I will often just go into a dangerous situation. And I'm not talking about like putting myself in harm's way, because I do spiritual work, so I make it work for me. Like, I will go and work with somebody who has an energy, that is especially difficult, you know what I mean? Or I will, attend to a question that brings me into psychic spaces that are just a little bit treacherous, because the way that my body and mind and being has been conditioned around coping with trauma is to stay to stay in the role of, if I can't, so this is where we're talking about the war god a little bit. If Oh, that's interesting. Hold on, I'm taking a step back because I gotta see something that's coming very clear to me right now that I've never seen before. So I'm gonna take a moment to just like look before I like translate. So that hypervigilance that I'm kind of like looking at here in the way of like keeping yourself extra busy, just under a little bit too much stress, like having too much stuff going on, or, you know, not disengaging with that fight or flight that has you frozen, or knowing that there are things that you can do and like feeling like there's absolutely no way that you can move a muscle because why? Everything's on high alert. So when we have had so much experience with high alert that it is our comfort zone, what it means to sort of like put our guard down, to step out of a defense, to step out of, and defense can come in like a number of ways. Defense can come in terms of demanding that people see us the way we want to be seen. Defense can come in the way of like demanding a certain like balance of energy exchange at every minute of every day so that no one will ever take too much from you like ever again. You know, like there's a lot that goes into what it means to like manage a traumatic space without the witness and the love and the care of another. And so like when we think about like that toughen up tough stuff, you know what I mean, that kind of happens with us, our guides want to sort of bring us into some level of change with that. So let's all take a cup of coffee, a sip of coffee or tea or whatever it is that you are drinking right now. And just look at what our cards are showing us a little bit. Me bringing in the information about, you know, keeping myself just a little bit activated so that I don't have to go into the survival place. You know, every single one of us has some version of that. Keeping ourselves, you know, too busy, keeping ourselves too distracted, feeling paralyzed. Again, that paralysis here with the Seven of Cups that's coming up with the Magician, like it's worth looking at that. Because I really want to be careful, you know, in some of these spaces, because I do know that we are in a healing process with time to rest a while. And when you're in a healing process, like one of the first things that you have to do is, you know, disengage the inner tyrant, that inner critic that is looking at your progress and saying, you know, you're not healing fast enough, or, you know, we have to get a move on, you know, winter is coming, you know what I mean? Like all of that stuff that is like deeply ingrained has to sort of be disengaged with. And so we have to come at this from another place where we're open to the stuff that is beneath. We're open to that depths of what is it that I am doing on autopilot to keep myself safe from other people, which is also keeping myself from other people and keeping myself from even like being close to other people. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff there. And this loneliness epidemic that's going on, it's not just men. Let's just, come on. I don't want to hear that. I look at your cards. You know what I mean? Like yes, men are, you know, in it in a way that they've never been in it before because they've always had the privilege of, you know, something to barter with by way of status that kept them from having to encounter these places, you know, like that. You know, hierarchical systems are systems of making those in privilege be the most baby, where everybody else works 1,000 times harder, and facilitating that babiness, you know, is like what we're talking about when we talk about like that astringent energy around the loneliness epidemic as it pertains to males. But I'm also looking at every single one of you. Okay, we're not going to have some like, you know, one of the worst things with loneliness is people feel ashamed of it. And they feel like they shouldn't be. And even when people are in a room surrounded by people, they feel insecure about whether people like them or not. And there's a loneliness, like, and that, you know, alienation, like touchdown. And now we're hypervigilant again, and we're managing the room instead of interacting with that space in a way that is more open, more receiving, more vulnerable. And so, like, let's call it what it is. It's, you know, if you are in a war god's world, if we're in a competitive world, then it's going to cause loneliness for everyone. So when we talk about what it is to heal from this, it's to open up to sort of like, you know, the depths of feeling around neglect, the depths of feeling around alienation, the depths of feeling around wanting desperately to connect. because I know that you want to be seen clearly. I know that you want to be cared about. And the reason that I know that is because when we enter the psychic space, when we enter the sacred space, that's what we're entering into. We come here for the purpose of that divine intervention. But our guides want us to have that in our daily lives, not as a performance, not as a, here's everything I did today, and like, here's the punchline, and like, we're having a good time, and like, let's get all the accoutrements together so that we can group distract. Let's step into our group distraction instead of, where are you? What do we need to do in the way of like holding each other? It's hard out here. This is the trenches. We've bonded, in these foxholes, and now it just, these wounds just hurt. And I know that you don't have the strength to carry me, and I don't have the strength to carry you. And so I'm not going to ask that, but both of us do need to get out of here. And so like, that's a different approach to what it means to meet and gather and commune. And when you look at the world that we're in, that's a lot more honest an approach. And so the loneliness isn't just about, how many people do you have around you and what's your network look like? It's when you are in those gatherings, how many of those people are safe with your deepest secrets and greatest insecurities? If none of them are, that's it. That's it. And for those of you that are looking out on your landscape of life and saying like, I lost the family, I lost the friends, and I lost everything in the way I had of like faith in humanity, because I went through something so horrible that now like I have no way of like salvaging, those losses. Like there are people who have like faced things that, as a result of nothing to do with themselves, have stripped them bare. And that's a different kind of loneliness, but it's the same thing. If there's not a place for you to be weak, then there's not a place for you anywhere. And so that absence of a feeling of belonging has less to do with where you're strategically placed in proximity to people, and more what it is to like just be a person, right? And so let's go ahead and get another sip of coffee. Let's look at that Wheel of Fortune, and let's think about what it means to change some of this stuff. Because the first thing that we can do when it comes to disabling this bomb and keeping that steady hand, is looking at where the wires are placed and saying like, okay, like this one wire here is called, I am actually, it's true, afraid of people, right? I may be in command of the room, but truthfully, and so we're going to say like, I'm afraid of people. That's what this is. And so we're going to just move that wire off of that bomb, right? By admitting that that's like the first thing that we're starting with in terms of the Seven of Cups confusion. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to be. I don't know how to connect. 1, I'm afraid. 2, I have coping mechanisms, that are built around, being in a world that is not safe for connecting. It's built for competition, and nobody knows how to connect. It's not just me. Like really taking yourself out of the bullseye on what it means to like look at this feeling and say it's not about failure, it's not about success or failure, it's simply about conditioning, and we're all conditioned away from each other, and so we're all lonely. And I guarantee it, I am very psychic. I stand in line at the supermarket and I just look around, and everyone has the same psychic bruise of loneliness that is getting so painful at this point that nobody can ignore it. And you're seeing it in the eyes, the big eyes of everybody who's just a little rattled at the gym because they're not getting what they need in the way of connection. And so now every interaction feels threatening because the body does that. That's just a wartime thing. And so like taking your personal responsibility out of it will help you with those there's like monologues that we have, inner monologues that we have, condemning ourselves, in comparison of what it looks like, someone else has by way of connection. A lot of these marriages are like elliptical, like you have to work at it so hard that at the end of the day, these muscles don't lend, themselves to softness. And so that's where we want to sort of disengage around these expectations about like perfect relationships and perfectly equal exchanges, and people seeing you correctly, and also people treating you correctly, because there's a lot around that we're going to pull cards on, because it goes right to the heart of, I don't feel safe around people. Wheel of Fortune is talking about a change that we can bring in. The beneath opens up to us, and I want us to like, with me, like this is going to be important because you have to, I almost like to scare myself, you know, when it comes to the deity field and when it comes to unseen energies, because it puts me back into my driver's seat of warrior mode. And that's where I'm most comfortable. That's where I've lived all my life. And when I'm not in that space, all of my superhuman confidence goes away. But we don't want the warrior right now because we can't connect with the warrior. And so, you know, I'm going to keep on touching this card, right? Every time I touch that card, it's going to bring me back to my own base where it says, okay, no, not warrior mode. We're being vulnerable. You know, we're not trying to slay a demon or figure out the great questions of, you know, the Nile or, you know, we're not knocking on heaven's door. We're just literally like, it's time to hang out. Like, it's bringing the warrior home is the hardest part, because all of that conditioning for war does not work well in the house. The way that you have to be in a war and in a battlefield and with your fellow comrades is not what makes sense with like an intimate, close, cozy environment, with intimate growth, with partnership. Like, none of that stuff works. Rank and file and hierarchy, power over, power under, balancing the power exchange, like that's all battlefield stuff. That's not, you know, the baby, you know, threw up all over the floor and like, you know, we all have to get ready and we're going to be late and grandma's going to be mad and we're crying with laughter because at this point it doesn't even make sense to be angry anymore. None of that scene has anything to do with an exchange being equal, right? And the reason why we have such a focus on equality right now is because we are confronting the abuses of power that have to do with creating a class of coddled babies that can be easily possessed and manipulated to destroy the world. And, you know, like the 1%, like that's going to be, you know, a conditioning, a privileging of a certain class for a certain purpose that is against community, right? Because we see it playing itself out on the material plane. And so, of course, we're hypersensitive about energy exchange because we're conditioned to a system of exchange around energy that is antithetical to connection, right? And so, having a sip of coffee, touching down to this beneath opens up to us. You know, when I come into that sacred space with my guides to alleviate, you know, some of the alienation of just not finding that safe space for myself, really. And again, that's my own personal work, you know, but like we all have versions of it. And so when we think about the scholar, investigation, and research, when we think about the magician, we have everything we need, you know, to make these connections, to create these relationships. But when we're looking at the fear, let's take some cards. Let's see what we have here. I have to just move that alert out of the way so I can see the time. So that's 20. I'm a little bit mindful of time today because this is a unexpected morning reading, but I think it's so important for us to sort of like look at the problem of loneliness as something that's spiritual. It's a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual disease. It's a spiritual sickness. And it's the matrix of conditioning that causes it. You know, of course we're afraid of people. You know, everybody's competing. Is it safe for you to go and open your heart and lay it bare and you know, show, you know, someone that it's just been too hard and you're too tired and it's, you know, and there's not enough and it's you know, backbreaking. You don't do that with somebody who you're competitive with, ever, you know what I mean? You know what you do with somebody who you're competitive with? I'm great. Things are amazing. You know what I mean? Like, things couldn't get better if they tried. And so, you know, because I'm going to win, you know what I mean? Because I can't, you know, all that stuff. And so when we think about this, like, competitive nonsense, you do it to yourself as much as you do it to others. You know, as much as others do it to you, you do it to yourself. You do it to yourself whenever you're trying to rank. And I think that the flame here, this is interesting. Why do we not show up fully? Why do we get like so nervous that we puke and we don't even go in the room? Right? That's a good question, because I think a lot of us in one way or another like experience levels of that. And with the ring in reverse here, you know, again, this is being about like, I don't trust that the people around me have my best interest at mind. I don't trust that the people around me are going to respect what I'm offering them and treat it with care by way of my heart, by way of my communication, like whatever it is. You don't expect to be handled with anything other than grubby, greedy fingers that like eat you up and then like toss you aside with like mean giggles of like superiority and smugness after they've taken everything, you know what I mean? Or, you know, other forms of REAP, you know what I mean? Like all the ways in which our labor, our, you know, insights, our value is devalued by way of somebody else's self-importance or, you know, center of the universe, or I have to survive against all odds. Because like, you know, when we talk about narcissism and covert narcissism, you know, the trap of becoming a narcissist is at its peak after you've just survived a narcissist. And that is because you are conditioned to, you know, having an ends justifying the means position on survival. And that ends justify the means position on survival, again, that means showing up with armor. You know, showing up with an agenda that says, you know, whatever it takes, you know, I don't care whose neck I have to step on, I have to survive right now. That's going to be the evilest you're ever going to be in one way or another. And like, that's what capitalism, or, you know, the structure sort of like drives us to, you know, that's what a spirit of competition, you know, sort of drives us to. It drives us away from the authentic experience of ourselves. It drives us away from the authentic experience of ourselves. I'm drowning. I'm scared. I don't understand. Why do I have to survive? I don't feel equipped. Everything is against my survival. This is too hard. That's the reality of every lived man, woman, and child on this earth. Like, don't tell me it's another way. I'm too close to the pulse. If we were able to come to each other with, I am drowning, that's a different entry point than, I'm fantastic, I'm amazing, you know, I'm getting it done. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very different place. And now you don't want to bring I am vulnerable, I am open to the battlefield, which means you're not gonna bring I am vulnerable, I am open to the workspace, unless your workspace is somehow like related to that. Like my workspace is that way. But you're not gonna bring that, you know, to, you know, the corporate ladder. But you do need to find a place for, I'm drowning, you know, I'm scared, I don't really know what's going on. You know, I'm trying to be on top of every single thing. I feel competent most of the time, but I wake up petrified. That's a good way to enter into what it means to relate. People don't know how to do that because, you know, in a situation of in a foxhole where I know that I don't have the strength to drag you out, you know that you don't have the strength to drag me out. Are we going to just stop communicating? Can I not, you know, cry about my wounds because you have to handle your wounds? This is what it is to be in a war god's world. And now we have to exchange, like, who's got the strength for the next 10 feet? Like, okay, how much is it going to cost you in energy? Well, you know, I'm going to have to get paid back. Like, we don't need to be that way, and we shouldn't be that way, and we got to stop short of being that way. And when it comes to approaching community spaces, we need to put the competition down. We need to check ourselves on the energies of competition and envy, because it's this, you know, the war god's shadow is tyrant, and the war god's in the divine masculine energy, because these things break up in a really interesting way. I'm charting it right now. You know, in terms of that agency energy. And the divine masculine energy of agency, the war god's name is tyrant. In its divine feminine aspect, its name is envy. And so envy is going to show up, you know, in 1,000 different ways, and nobody's exempt. I didn't know that. I had to like really get a hold of that because it was showing up in readings all the time. And I'm like, what the hell is that? You know what I mean? Like, again, like, it didn't make immediate sense to me for a very, very long time, because I would even see it in the way that people would regard me, and it would make no sense to me because my personal experience, I'm like drowning, I'm lost, you know, I'm at sea, you know, there's a storm, I'm like, I'm freaking out. My personal experience does not match up with, you know, she thinks she's so this and she thinks that, you know what I mean? Like, when that's that whole, you know, axis of like envy, you know, to reality, you know, competition. You know, the tyrant has no place in I'm drowning, I'm lost, I'm scared. There's no place for the tyrant in that spot. And there's no place for envy in that spot either. And so when that is the reality of the deep, And that is where the needs need to be met. And you can't take those needs into the world without hitting competition in the way of a tyrant. You have to do this, you have to be that way, and you have to do it that way, and feel better. You know what I mean? That's the tyrant, right? You can't bring that to the tyrant. That's not going to help you. You're not going to that's not going to do anything. And you can't bring that space into, you know, like the marketplace of attention either, because then it's like, you know, I am vulnerable, you know, I am hurting, has no place in, she's cool, but she's like this, that, and the other, and I'm this, that, and the other. And that's because that's not safe, because that's the same energy as the tyrant. You should be better or you should be worse. And you know what I mean? Because envy, you know, we have like this epigenetic conditioning, and like, you know, the epigenetic conditioning around envy, when you think about like the subjugation of divine feminine energies in the world, was about your life depends on you holding the attention. Your life depends on you holding the attention. Your life depends on you managing that attention, and that managed attention has to be flattering and uplifting, and if it's not, you're at war. And now you have to strategize, and now you have to manipulate, and now you have to go undercover, and now you have to pretend yourself, and now you have to get tough, and now you have to ends justify the means, and my survival, and my sons and daughters' survival, and they will die. You know what I mean? Like that's in the aspect that is like a feminine sort of aspect. And again, I have to be careful, because I'm doing like really good work on like messing around with like what these energies mean, like outside of, you know, sex assignment, and like how this is really interesting on a spectrum as well. And so like, as I'm throwing these phrases out, like I know that they fall short, but that's because there's like a body of scholarship that I'm trying to get, you know, like accomplished by way of like actually looking at it alchemically. And so, you know, whether you're in that energy of envy or you're in that energy of tyrant, you're still in a competition that is going to keep you buried alive and ensure that everybody else stays that way. And so how do you enter community without all of this fear around what it means to show up right? And that's kind of where we have like the flame keeps going out, because where we need to meet and commune and sort of work on what it means to overcome the loneliness is, I'm drowning, I'm scared, it's the apocalypse, you know, it's a global pandemic, you know, the structures are collapsing around us. We don't know how to relate outside of shared belief. I am tired, right? That's this, okay? This is what needs connection. This is what needs love. This is what needs a place to talk and cry and process and be too loud and sometimes be annoying, but often, you know, be funny. And at the end of the day, it's safe to hug, because nobody has some sort of like, you know, sexual agenda. You know what I mean? Like, you see all the guardrails that pop up around what it means to like, I want to relate, but I don't want you to have the wrong idea about that. I want to relate, but I don't want you to have the wrong idea about that. I want to relate, but don't do that to me. I want to relate, but what I share with you, you better not do that with. I want to relate, but you know, like, do you see this? You know, but you see me this way, and I want to be seen this way, and you won't see me this way. So all of the ways in which I want to relate has to like make its way through a minefield of protecting yourself from competition in the form of either tyrant or envy. And everyone holds envy, and everybody holds the tyrant, and I don't want to hear anything other than that, because I'm telling you, I've never seen a perfect angel saint in my entire life. I don't think they exist. I'm not one, you know. I have meltdowns, you know what I mean? Like we all have our stuff, you know what I mean? So I almost said your name, and I couldn't get to the name because it's funny. It was like, so a name has a resonance, and it has nothing to do with like the sound of it. And so when I say like, I almost, like your guide said, like I felt the resonance of a name without the sound of it. So I don't know your name, right? But I almost, like your guide wanted to almost say your name. Like I didn't have the word for it in my mind because it wouldn't have come out that way. But it's almost like your guide is saying like, whatever your name is, like you, listen, you know, like this, like beating yourself up, this like feeling shame, you know, this like I can't show up because I'm too petrified. This like the anxiety has got me locked in. There's lots of good reasons for that, but let's first start with like, I'm afraid of people. I'm afraid of people because of competition and envy, but I need courage because the change that needs to happen here when it comes to bringing myself into the world is one where I recognize that nothing can snuff me out because I am an eternal flame. nothing can take me and steal me because I'm an eternal frame. You know, I'm an infinite being. This is not something that you have to defend constantly in the way that you're defending it. Because while, yes, it is true that everyone is cracked out on the acid of competition and everyone is possessed with the war god's mad king, you know what I mean? Like, all of that is true. But your guy's saying, if you understand that the drowning that's going on, because they're showing me this image of the Titanic and like everybody is in the water together, and there is no lifeboat action happening if one of us does not in some way start to blow the damn whistle that can kind of alert, you know, the universe to what needs to happen here. Because when I say blow the whistle, I mean as long as you are in a position of, you know, like, I'm making it work, I'm getting it right, you know what I mean? Like, you know, 10 steps to like the perfect body, 50 steps to, you know, the right angle on you know, the book or whatever. Like, as long as you are in a competition to survive, you're spinning out away from the need, you know, instead of towards getting it met. And that means, you know, a level of maintenance that will never give you rest. Or you have to be in such a hermit mode that there is only rest. And these are extremes that your guys are just like, no, get off the battlefield. Like, the battlefield is not the place for getting these needs met. We can know that when we say, like, I'm afraid of everyone on the battlefield. Excellent. Like, put a period at the end of that sentence. Now we know not to be vulnerable on the battlefield. Where is the battlefield? Unfortunately, it's pretty much like everywhere at this moment because people just don't know how to operate in another way. But with the tower here, there's some good news. You know, because the tower tells us that everyone holding this deep ache and this deep bruise is getting to a place where it's unsustainable and they need others. And so this is being forced in one way or another. And so with this Page of Swords being, I always see the Page of Swords as a message, a messenger, you know, a piece of info about moving into a better place with this. We move into a better place with this by saying, I need to find the right people and the right kind of a container to meet at the level of I'm really freaked out by the world right now. Like, I'm really scared, you know, of the way that I am feeling, you know, like all that stuff that, you know, that speaks to the experience of being a slave. And so I actually, you know, I think that it's funny because I've been writing this very long piece that is actually, it's so important that I'm taking my time with it, and I don't, almost like don't care about the expectations even that I set of myself, because I don't want to you know, rush something out because I feel like, you know, to meet those expectations kind of a thing. But I've been working with this Don Juan, oh, this is kind of perfect. I've been working with this energy that I met, it was one of my readings, an energy came through, and she was a slave, and she was related to somebody who I was doing a reading for, and it was one of these situations where sometimes a guide will look at me and say, I've, you know, test your metal a little bit, or, you know, whatever. But if I look at a position through the lens of another person's perspective, I can often see a lot about my perspective that I wasn't able to see before. Like, privilege is absolutely a blinding faculty. It is a faculty that blinds. It is a function that blinds. And when you're trying to tell a blind person, look, you know, it's a real problem. And you know, that's one of the biggest things that, you know, I struggle with in terms of, you know, translating some of the stuff that I translate, you know, and then I have this wisdom, you know, and like, how do I then share that, you know? So I saw through the, like, I was looking at the energy of envy through the eyes of a slave, and we were having a whole exchange about this because it blew my mind, because I'd never seen it like that before. And she showed me something that I'd never seen before. And I think that, you know, the thing that can heal, because a lot of times when we have something like hierarchy and we have victim and perpetrator, for better or worse, is a ranking system. And unfortunately, you know, when we're talking about power and everything operates around the axis of power, the victim perpetrator template can often force us to be trapped in a, like, again, that ranking, a rank under the perpetrator. And you don't want to ever be a permanent victim, constantly ranked under a perpetrator, that even if you've identified the perpetrator, pointed out the perpetrator, told the story about the perpetrator, and like even put the perpetrator in a box, that story structure of perpetrator and victim still keeps you victimized, because it's a spiritual structure that, like, whether or not you have like mitigated the circumstances like in the material realm, unless you like undo that structure at a story level, it has that hold. And so when we were looking at this notion of vengeance, you know what I mean, and like, oh, so you think you're going to enslave people and build a nation on it? I hope you enjoy being a slave nation. You know what I mean? Because that's kind of like what happens, that's sort of the karma there. And it works, makes kind of a sense. But when we think about this, I don't trust, I'm afraid. A system of power over power under, a hierarchical system, a ranking system, a competition system, and all the stories that operate around that ranking and competition leave us in positions where to love and to connect puts us in some relationship to slavery. It puts us in some relationship to sexual exploitation. And again, sexual exploitation is not just about the physical body and sexuality. It's going to also be an exploitation of anything creative. Because that's, again, like, that's all that intimacy stuff under this notion of theft falls under the Don Juan category, just like slavery, just at a different angle. Like, there's just a lot going on there in terms of subjugation. And so, like, we can look at this stuff very honestly and say, okay, that the only way to heal this, like the only true way to connect through the victim perpetrator story to the other side of it, is to come at it from a position, a very strong position, utilizing the aspect of the word God that is advocate, but it's coming at it from a position that is, we are all slaves. Now, if we can connect as all slaves, if we can even look at our slavery and say, your slavery ranks you there and my slavery ranks me here, but the feeling of the abyss around, I am drowning, I am scared, I don't know what I am doing, why is it like this, I am being tasked with my own survival. Why do I have to survive? Why is something against my survival that is causing me to have to survive? If we know that everyone is enslaved to that very thing, you're on the battlefield and you have to survive. Tough shit. Maybe you're at the front and it's worse than the guy at the back, but guess what? There's nothing else but survival here. Good luck, right? That's the abyss. That's the PowerPoint of loneliness and what it means for us to bridge that gap, because the story structure is important in terms of identifying the story structure, is important in terms of healing mechanisms. But if we're to disqualify, if we're to interrupt the circuit on connecting and healing, we have to disengage that victim perpetrator story. Jesus used forgiveness. When Jesus came in, his prophetic work and what he brought in through his channeling was a technology of forgiveness. How do you fight a war god? It's going to be using the technology of forgiveness, because you disqualify the war when you forgive. The same goes for looking at this world that we're in and saying, the way that we're going to connect, the only way that we're going to connect in a world of competition, the only way that we're going to make a connection from, in a world of war is, I'm a slave, you're a slave. You tell me your slave story. I'm going to tell you my slave story. We're going to bear witness to the slavery that we are under. And that's going to connect us. And then once that connection is established, the system gets undermined completely. Does that mean letting people off the hook because, they were farther away from the battlefield and they threw a sword in your back because they did, they had to, like, what I mean? They don't know why, you know what I mean? But like, you were there and something was running there and, whatever, it's, all is fair in love and war, right? You know what I mean? Like, there's really good reasons why you don't feel safe connecting. That's an important thing to put in your pocket too. You're not lonely because you're like an idiot, bad person, loser. Because I hear your like inner critic, that inner cricket, spouting nonsense. This is like what it means to like really be honest with ourselves about this journey into connection, this journey into seeing ourselves and others clearly. Seeing ourselves and others clearly is not everyone's divine, bright, perfect light. No. Seeing ourselves clearly is we are slaves. And we are warped by this. And we need to find a way to admit to each other that we're scared under the slave driver's whip, all of us. It's only from that place that any connection can in any meaningful way start. That is a vulnerable place. That is not a place of competition. And that is not a place of ranking. That is a place of defeat. Hold that while I have a sip of my coffee. That is a place of defeat. You know how you beat a war god? You admit when there's defeat. You admit when there is defeat. And that courage comes from being in that place that says, you know, we admit that there is defeat. We admit that the war god has defeated us. We admit that the war god has enslaved us. We admit that enslaving and that ranking of the slaves has pit us against each other, so that we uphold the slave driver's edicts, so that we keep the rank to keep our place in it. When we admit defeat, we are powerless to the reality of what's been created here. That's the only place to begin to move into a new space. And so with the Magician here being about, we have everything that we need on this table to begin to connect again. One is looking at this notion of a conditioning around, like, you know, competition and war god, you know, energies that tell you that to have a friend, to have a lover, to have a partner is about acquisition. It is about conquering, and it is about holding that territory as yours. And now that's what belonging is. No, no, that is war god sickness at the deepest level. Somebody is not for you. Somebody is a planet, and you are a planet, and you are an orbit in the universe. Like, there's so much, like, it's making people bigger, not smaller. It's making yourself bigger, not smaller. You know, and it's taking a position on relationships that is not about conquer, acquisition, and hold the territory, because that's not safe. And so when you realize that conquer, acquisition, and hold the territory speaks to not only this notion of, like, how do we relate to each other, but then how do we operate in that relationship? And then what does it mean to, like, think about this as something that we have as a possession? There's a lot of work and defending and war and strategy that goes into that kind of relating. When somebody when somebody, like, when you look at another person and you think to yourself, you know, every god and goddess, you know, in the deity field has an origin story somewhere in this course of development that has them on Earth for a period of time. So you're not encountering, you know, just a random Joe Schmo. That's the illusion. You're encountering a deity in becoming. And so when I encounter someone and I look at somebody and I say, you're a fellow goddess and you're a fellow god, your territory is sovereign. That is a boundary that can make me feel safe if everybody is in shared belief about that. Let's go ahead and get some more cards. I like where this is going. I mean, I think this reading might be the enrichment reading. I wasn't expecting it, but my guides have been organizing my time in a way that surprises me. I'm actually working with some new guides, and they're kind of tinkering with my schedule a little bit. And so last week I did the reading on a Tuesday, and today is a Wednesday, and so it's almost like they want me to be in this earlier with the 8 of coins. This is work. So since this is part of my morning meditation, you know, my guides are saying, you know, in terms of this 8 of coins work, then there's work that has to be done here. And of course, with this 2 of cups, work that has to be done on what it means to relate correctly. If we want to get out of this place of loneliness as a humanity, not just as a culture, as a humanity, if we want to overcome this loneliness as a humanity, if we want to stop being afraid of each other as a humanity, that fear of the other is the seed of the disease of hierarchy. That's it. That fear of the other. That is the name of the darkness that once it fell and began to spread took over the world. The war god took over the world with that seed of fear of the other, right? And so when we see this 2 of Cups, and this 8 of Pentacles, the work that we have to have when it comes to relating with each other is first understanding that there's no safe vulnerability on the battlefield, and that all the gaslighting that is existing around you right now that is telling you that you should be safe with people and you should get out there and it's going to be good, and people are fun and people are great, and find your community and find your best. You know what I mean? Like, this is all this gaslighting, because no, it's not safe out there. If people are competing, if they're looking at you like a milking cow, if they're looking at you like a stepping stone, if they are looking at you like something that gives them superiority, if they're looking at you in any way other than we are both slaves, of course it's not safe. Of course it's not safe when you're at dinner. Of course it's not safe when you perceive yourself as showing up to be exploited in one way or another, because that's that Don Juan energy. Putting your heart on the table, opening your body up, going into those deep, intimate places, with what it means to connect and relate, which is human nature, only to, be hooked up to a machine that is going, that is just siphoning your life force, with wanton glee and throwing it, I'm just seeing someone like throw their pearls to swine. It's everyone has pearls that are being extorted for the swine. Like, we do understand that, right? And so, like, that's what it is to say, like, we're all, we know that we have to do a lot of healing, and we have to do a lot of, I'm hearing the words truth and reconciliation. I think that's from, I'm seeing Reverend Tutu. I hate when my guides don't give me the whole damn Africa. All right, the continent. There's a truth and reconciliation board or doctrine or theory somewhere out there. We can find it by Googling it. And, our guides are saying, yes, there's a tremendous amount of truth and reconciliation that has to happen among the slaves in rank and file. But we start with, we are all slaves. And that is what that abyss, that alienation, that I'm drowning, I'm lost, I'm scared. Why is there a sword in my hand? Why am I being told that I have to fight for my survival? I just want to go home, and I don't have another feeling at the base of my being. That is everyone, right? And so that is, I am a slave. I admit it. I see it. I'm going to call it what it is. And I'm going to look at everyone around me, and I'm going to begin to enter the space of relating from a place of knowing that says, that man is a slave, I'm a slave. You know what I mean? And that's why we're not safe. That's why this is not a safe place. But that doesn't mean that you can't connect. That doesn't mean that you can't open from the beneath and step into that healing space. Because that healing space exists at a place of acceptance around, this is the land that I'm standing on. This is the landscape that I'm in. This is a serious situation that we all find ourselves participating with. When you adopt that story and you get rid of the story that says, pick up your bootstraps, do better, you know what I mean? Like, well, if you just, you know what I mean? Like, it's not supposed to be, like, there's so many, every time, like, I keep on getting a flash of the new United States press secretary as, like, exemplifying the most pointed qualities of the nastiest demon, that I've ever seen in the way of envy, because that's what envy looks like. If you're wondering what envy looks like, it looks like that type of pick-me, you know what I mean? Like, that is proximity to power through the smug subjugation of everything else, and so to that service, you know what I mean? Like, there's something so sick and twisted there. But when it comes to this time to rest for a while, you're going to stop condemning yourself for failing to meet the standards, set by the regiment that is putting you on a battlefield and putting a sword in your hand and telling you you're going to die if you don't fight. You're going to first look at those quality of life milestone goals and call them what they are. And it's marching orders. And you're going to put your marching orders down, and you're going to go, you know what? I'm not here for any of that succeeding, in quotes. I'm not there to succeed, like that. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to have the beneath open up to me. and to bring that beneath into the world with me, and to make it a power of meaning making and transformation. And so this time to rest for a while is first about, looking at this loneliness not as a tyrannical menace that is here to drive you into, levels of ecstatic agony, because it almost looks like that, but rather like this loneliness is accompanying me and every other soldier on this battlefield of mercenary slaves. And it's part of what is telling us that things are not right, and that we have to find a way to connect with each other in order to overcome this story, this tyrannical story that holds power over all of our lives. We first have to disqualify that story by identifying properly the role that we are in as a people, as a humanity. And then we have to find a way to connect that isn't about the marching orders that we have been given by ways, this is how you survive and this is how you thrive. And if you don't, you're a loser. And if you don't, you're a failure and you're gonna die. And everyone is going to abandon you, and you're going to be bleeding out on a battlefield by yourself while everyone has moved on to the kingdom where they're celebrating their victory over the massacre of your people. Do you hear the seriousness of that? And then you're going to ask yourself why you don't feel safe. You don't feel safe, now we can rest. Okay, we know what's going on. Let's take that iron jacket of shame and throw it on the ground, because you didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. This is the situation that we find ourselves in. We're not relating well because we're gaslit into thinking that we're in some kind of competition for survival that we're not in. We're not competing with each other. We just have to start with, I'm not going to exploit you. You're not going to exploit me, because the situation that we are in is about an exchange related to how much are you willing to exploit the person 3 rungs down on the ladder. Now that's going to fuck you up and now you're trapped, And so we're not going to do that, but we're also not going to be comparing ourselves to others. We're not going to be in an imaginary, debate, with somebody else about the value of what we are or we're not doing. That's envy. Stop it. I'm speaking to my collective with the biggest love in all of my heart, because none of you are being condemned. I do all this stuff. You think that, I wrote something that my guides have been kind of working with me on that did have some sneaky superiority or smugness in it or something like that. They've been helping me see things in another light. But everybody has some stupid way of seeing things that eclipses somebody else's experience, and we're not in competition with our narratives and some kind of supremacy with those narratives. And so if you're in your head on a constant loop of defense, instead of being able to connect, that defense is convincing you that you can't connect. It's like a script and programming that is playing to make it so that you get to a level where you try to leave the house and you're having a phobic reaction to it. You've got to stop that loop, cut that loop, cut it. You're not in competition. Nobody's out to get you in this moment, right? And I think we have to kind of be very specific about compartmentalizing some of this stuff. On the battlefield of ends justify the means survival, people are willing to steal, kill, maim, and that's a reality that warrants acceptance in terms of, in a world of slaves, there's a lot of deprivation. In deprivation, there's a lot of distortion. In that distortion, we kill each other and we attack each other. You can accept that and also understand that no one's attacking you personally. It's not personal attack. It's not about your worth. It's not about who you are, what you bring to the table, and whether the table is ready for that or will accept that. We got to compartmentalize a little bit. And so that the things that are systemic aren't terrorizing you on an individual in the house personal level, so that when your individual in the house experience is actually safety, that you partake in that safety, you bring that safety in, and you make that safety a part of your felt experience enough that it becomes something that that you can, because you have to work on making that your homeostasis. Right now, that's not your homeostasis. Right now, your homeostasis is charging into the battlefield, because that's when you feel most alive and the most in control. And so you have to keep some level of threat in order to maintain that. I'm talking to myself now as well as you. because it is important for us to come into a place of communion. That means it's important for all of us to take us off the pedestals. Don't put anyone on a pedestal, like not even yourself, right? But at the same time, don't put anyone beneath you either. That is against the grain. That is against our conditioning. That doesn't even make sense. Even attractiveness and what you're attracted to in people by way of like the friends you want to keep and the lovers you want to have has to do with the rank more than it has to do with what's actually going to satisfy your needs. That's the truth. Attraction is when I look at people's cards, it's about like 80%, defense mechanism. It really is. And that's, when you talk about like this, these are conditioning things. And so, this is a big job with the Eight of Pentacles, when it comes to making sure that you understand that it's okay to feel lonely. It's okay to be disoriented. It's okay to be confused. You're conditioned to have that as a homeostasis to keep you running into the battlefield. You're not going to keep that as your homeostasis. You're going to look around and you're going to say, in this moment, right now, in this minute, I am safe. And for the next hour, I'm completely safe, and I'm going to sit in that safety, and I'm going to savor that safety, and I'm going to allow myself be in that safety, which means you're going to put a big ban on any kind of attack thoughts. You're going to keep the battlefield at bay, because if all you exist and all you feel of yourself existing is battlefield vibes, then you're possessed by the war god, and that's nothing to be afraid of. Like again, it's just think about it like conditioning. Like it's just something to move away from. And when you recognize yourself as the slave, then you can say, this is my hour of freedom and I'm going to savor it. This is my evening of no demands, and I'm not going to condemn myself for not meeting demands of the dishes and the laundry, because I'm living in an environment that when I take the gaslighting away, I'm a slave, and this is my hour of peace. I'm going to savor it. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I'm not going to panic when I feel like I have to, survive. I'm going to understand that I'm safe in this process if I know what's going on, and I understand as I move through it what I'm dealing with. The trauma is so much worse when we don't talk about it, when we don't share it. When you have a traumatic event of being abandoned on a battlefield and told, good luck. Good luck, you're an adult now. When that's a traumatic experience that you've had and there's no one with you to say, we're slaves, this is terrifying, of course we're scared. No, we shouldn't have to survive like this. This is so weird. Let's just I know that you're too wounded to get out of the trench, and I'm too wounded to get out of the trench, but let's share a cigarette. And I'm not suggesting that we smoke, I'm just seeing two people in a trench. And I know that there's something about when you share a cigarette, you become more vulnerable, and then other people can aim and shoot. And so there's something significant about that shared vulnerability. For some reason, that's just coming at me as a flash. Hopefully maybe somebody else gets a bigger picture on that. But I think that it has to do with recognizing that we are both slaves. And again, that's not disqualifying the power and the hold that a victim perpetrator has on our relating within the battlefield. That these two things, we have to be able to look at the truth in two places and say these things correspond, and now we can use that correspondence and to move from this place into a place of truth and reconciliation. But first we have to establish this baseline, and so when you can do that, it's no longer I'm lonely, I'm failing, I'm not enough, everything is positioned against me, no matter what I do, this is what happens, no matter what I do, that's what happens, I'm just tired, I just wanted to stop, as I can hear this chorus around me when I stick my head in the psychic space a good number of times. And so because that's the chorus of everyone, right, we can stop singing that song. We can say, okay, all right, we're in the trenches. If we share the cigarette, someone might shoot us, but then we're going to know where they're hiding. And then we can crawl together in this other direction. And then we're going to find this weird little spot. And are you going to die? Maybe, me too. There's a little something here to eat. I think it's a pecan. Now it's funny, and we're going to laugh. And so now life looks a little different, doesn't it? Life, you're in the same war, in the same horrible situation, but the trauma impact is not as intense, because you're able to look at each other and say, I can't carry you and you can't carry me. We're pretty damn screwed, but let's share a pecan and laugh at how ridiculous that war gods, matriculations really are, because we are infinite and we're going to come back around and we're going to get this right sooner or later, and we are going to defeat this situation, and we're going to emancipate ourselves, and we're going to emancipate our others, and we're going to figure it out. The beneath opens up to us when we can say, okay, we're all slaves here. It's going to be a mess. Different people have different wounds. Different people have different reactivity to what it means to enter the orbit of those wounds. And in order to get into a place of community, we admit what the baseline is, and we understand that that's the starting point, and that there's a lot that goes on in the way of truth and reconciliation, to bring us into a better place with this. I have to look that up because that's so significant to this reading. If somebody wants to, I don't want to poke for engagement or something, but if somebody wants to put a little link or a comment, I'm going to look that up when I'm done, because part of this morning meditation for me is going to be I want to look that up when I'm done. But I think that's super important somehow. I think that's significant in some way or another. I see the continent. I know it's Africa because I'm seeing the continent. I'm sorry, it's embarrassing because I know the name of I know what it is. I see Reverend Tutu. I just can't get there all the way. Come on, guys. This is this funny thing in 5 of coins. I'm going to share something funny with this 5 of pentacles. So I have this long list of learning disabilities. There's a lot of disabilities that are associated with the experience of Lisa Lee, and I think that's why I'm psychic, honestly. I think that everything kind of goes together, and I process information in kind of a weird way. I understand things in a way that is, I had to have a lot of kind of training around a lot of different things. So for me, sometimes language doesn't work exactly like I want it to. I'll see an array of images and an array of symbols, and I won't be able to get the exact words, right? And so I have all of my life had people, I've had bullying experiences. People have bullied me in elementary school and middle school around this idea of you're so stupid, or you know what you're talking about, either it's suspicion, you know what I mean, or you're so dumb, this 5 of Pentacles. And it's just a disability around certain types of processing. But it ends up being kind of a superpower because I read symbols really fast and really furiously, at a rate that, allows for a discourse with divine energies that's really fast, right? And so, if we are stuck in I hate myself because I'm so stupid, and I can see the continent and I know the characters, but the word is not coming, and other people are going to judge me, and they're going to think I'm stupid, or they're going to think that, I know it and I'm just not saying it. That's the kind of shit that keeps us from ever connecting with each other. And honestly, one step beyond that is when you're looking at somebody, instead of just kind of listening to their blunder, making a whole array of judgments around strategy and rank and file about where they are and what they're doing, that's keeping you from connection. Because if we just are we're all slave, nobody's, everybody's got some weird 5 of Pentacles way of trying to bring themselves into the world, and not a single person is going to see them clearly through a lens of competition, comparison, and rank and file. And that's Yaldabaoth energy, right? Is this, I have been neglected, I have been left out, and so now everybody else, is cast in a certain kind of light, and all of their motives are come under the dominion of my interpretation of their value and their worth based on the treatment that I received. Now, that makes a lot of sense, right? Except that if we're all slaves, and I am just as much a fiction to you as you are to me, very naturally, because we're not connecting at the level of depth. We're connecting at the level of performance and roles. Then you're always wrong about me, and I'm always wrong about you, and everything that we think in the way of where we're positioning ourselves is part of the indoctrination of a slave driver. We can stop participating in the modalities of envy or the modalities of tyranny. Tyranny is demanding that somebody see you in the way that you want to be seen. And if they're not seeing you in the way that you want to be seen, then you're never going to talk to them again, and they're never going to understand you, and F them. That's a type of tyranny. Does that mean that you should be around somebody who is like hell-bent on seeing you as like a dum-dum so that they can feel better about themselves? No. But that, because again, that's somebody who's participating in envy. You don't have to participate in envy with the person that is casting you in a certain light. If someone is casting you in a light that's above them or below them, or somehow, you know, in relationship to their smugness, they're in envy. But you don't have to look at their rendition of artist rendition of how they perceive you and take it on and get into a fight with them about demanding that they see you right. They're not going to see you right because it doesn't serve them. Something else does. And you're just going to walk away from that. You're not going to participate in a competition. You're just going to go somewhere and be authentically in relationship to yourself and authentically in relationships to others. And you're not going to look at envy, and you're not going to get envy to push you into tyranny, and you're not going to play the game of competition when what you need in the way of your needs met is to go to the people that are around you that you feel safe with or that you want to feel safe with, and begin to think about, that person's a slave, I'm a slave, we're in the trenches. They're not better than me. They're not worse than me. I'm not better than them. I'm not worse than them. I'm overwhelmed. I'm drowning. I'm lost. And I know that they are too. And the way that they're expressing it is different than the way that I'm expressing it. I might be expressing my fear in a way that keeps me locked up inside, judging everybody from a place of superiority that nobody else knows about. Or my fear might have me screaming on a soapbox about my superiority without even realizing that that's what I'm doing. It doesn't matter. It's still the same demon that we're holding, you know? And so when we stop, and it's hard to form a place of self-identity and form an understanding about how you operate in the world without casting some lot on comparison. And that's something that's really difficult. Like, I wrote this thing, Confessions of a TikTok tarot reader, and I'm really thinking about taking it down. I probably will. Not because I don't think that that processing was important for me, and not because I don't think that that information is valuable. I just think that if people were to come at it from a place of comparison, that now we have a war. Now we're in envy and tyranny. But I'm coming at it from a place of comparison without even realizing it. Like, these things happen at such an undercurrent where you're trying to identify who you are, and you're using methods of comparison to do so without even realizing it, because that's the only method you've ever been given, and that's the only method that anybody else has been given, and now we're trapped, you know. But we don't have to be. You know, because I can just as well leave that, you know, article up there and write another article about why that's a partial picture, and that as we evolve and we can see clearer with new eyes and new perspectives, the old picture has the things that are good about it that move into the new picture, but that old picture can be thrown away, you know. And so those old methods of finding ourselves can be thrown away, but only after we're able to engage with ourselves enough to see that stuff is even there. You know, and so like when it comes to like showing up in community, there isn't really a community that is safe right now, because everybody has this operating system of comparison and positioning that makes us all a Don Juan and a slave, you know what I mean? Like, in relationship to each other, which is not what we want to do. Let's look at the shadow aspects. The shadow aspect of a slave here archetype is giving your willpower to an external authority out of fear of making your own choices. What does that look like? I think we can, you know, like, I always want to take the most petty things because like they're the easiest to pluck, but like your sense of style, because I'm looking at this dress. This energy's got like a pretty cool outfit on right there. You know, and it's a very unique kind of sense of style, right? So, your own choices, bold, bright prints. Like, I'm going back to elementary school. I basically, my sense of style is my sister's sense of style, because I like fashion, and it is kind of a special interest a little bit, but I really don't know how to dress myself. Like, there's parts of I have disabilities that like make it hard for me to like do certain like weird little things, you know what I mean? And so like I know what I like to wear. I know the colors and like the shapes that I kind of like feel like are fun to like put on and kind of prance around in. You know, like different things like kind of appeal to me. But when it comes to like putting together like an aesthetically pleasing ensemble that then like, you know, translates like a certain kind of like confidence with clothing, I just sort of dress like my sister does. And I've always done that. You know, she's older than me. And I have just taken every aspect of her sense of style in terms of the way that she dresses, and I've appropriated it into like the way I do it. Because for me, it's like a path of least resistance. Like I don't have to, this is not something that I really have to like work on too hard. If I'm like, if I call my sister and I'm like, help me pick out some clothes, I trust that what she's going to pick out is going to be good and I just can wear it. Now, that's giving my authority over to somebody else to manage my outfit, because I'm afraid that if I do it myself, I'm going to just like, it's going to be obvious that like I'm weird, that I'm too matchy. I don't know. Anytime that I've been made fun of, like now I just take that decision making and I give it to the authority of somebody else, right? So like there's ways in which like we cooperate, and the area of giftedness in one person is useful for somebody else. But when it comes to giving your willpower away to an external authority out of fear of making your own choices, if you're doing this from a place of fear, where you're hollowing yourself out to become somebody else, that's different. You know what I mean? Like, or when you, like this is kind of about even like the quality of life mandates that we talked about in the way of like, here's your sword, go out on the battlefield, good luck surviving, and if you don't, torture. You know what I mean? Like those mandates are going to be, if I don't have this, that, and the other, I'm a failure and everybody is going to see me as such. So I'm going to, out of fear, make all of these choices to appease those demands. That's the slavery right there. So it's like whether or not it's like as simple as something as you not getting in touch with, things that make you feel good in terms of how you want to adorn yourself, because other people might not understand, like that's a lack of authentic expression that you're affording yourself. But it doesn't necessarily have to be treacherous or bad if it's just something that, you're working through and you're kind of like letting somebody help you like with the scaffolding up. But when it comes to all of those mandates, where you're having to rank and compare and rank and compare, that's surrendering your willpower over to the rank that you're comparing yourself to in one way or another. And so when we move to this place of surrendering our power of choice to the divine with complete trust, that's very different. That's a very different position than I have to rank right. And if I'm going to survive, I don't care. I'm just going to take, you know what I mean? And this is what everyone does. And like, I can see somebody like spiraling in this, and it's kind of like, just stop it. Everybody's a slave. Everybody's lost and drowning. What are you doing to contribute to everybody, having a better experience? Or are you acting as the war god and you bringing the tyranny, and you're bringing tyranny? I want to be seen in this way, and that's that, you know what I mean? Instead of like, who am I? You know what I mean? Or are you bringing in the envy of, it doesn't matter, I have to position myself and my family and whatever it takes, because that person is where I want to be, and that person is where I was, and I'm not going to be that again, but I'm going to be that. And the way that I'm going to be that is I have to do this, and it doesn't matter because this is what, these are all ends justify the means, ways of destroying ourselves and others. Don't do it. Don't participate in that. The antidote to participating in that is is first taking this time to rest and saying, you know what? I'm a slave. They're a slave. We're all slaves. I'm either holding this energy of tyranny, or I'm holding this energy of envy, and I need to put both of those energies down, and I need to pick up the energy of advocacy. And when I pick up the energy of advocacy, now where are we? We're all slaves. Now, from the place of advocacy, okay, we're all slaves. I'm resting with that. I'm open to what this really means, so that I can understand it for myself and I can understand it for others. When I understand it for myself and I understand it for others, I'm less afraid. That doesn't mean there aren't dangerous people operating in desperation as a result of all these things. It just means that I see it for what it is, and I'm not trying to show up in my best outfit and my best self and get acceptance. You see it for what it is. You put the sword down. Get acceptance, comparison, ranking. Like, stop. Stop. That there's another way to relate to each other. We're going to turn this around. There's another way to relate to each other, and it starts with advocacy. We are all slaves. We're going to look up and Google truth and reconciliation in a little while. so that we can kind of see where that fits with this reading, because I think that that's an important part of, nice. Wow, though, look at like that. 9 of Cups. A different way to relate. 10 of Pentacles, the legacy, the wealth. What is wealth? What's wealth? I feel like the richness of being in relationship with each other, you know, like not having to survive. That's the 10 of Pentacles. Is literally generational wealth. It means not having to survive, not having to be on the battlefield. You know, in the world that we are in, if you aren't being forced on the battlefield, you are forced into a position where you're moving the pieces on the battlefield and treating life like it's disposable. You have one of two choices. I, for one, will take the battlefield any day of the week, because the karma there is we are all in this together. Whereas the hollowed out tusks, you know, that are moving those pieces around aren't even, you know, there's something there that's really powerful for you to understand when it comes to generational wealth. Because there's a phrase, and it's I don't know where the hell it comes from. That person was so poor, all that they had was money. That person is so poor, all that they have is money. If you're at a place in your life where your greatest ideal in terms of the emotional poverty that you're experiencing is to just have money, you guys are saying like, no, because all that my throat chakra, all that leads to on the ladder is trying to take dominion over others and hold that territory. And so where's my water? Because I need something for my throat right now. Put down the sword. You might have to put down the sword and be alone in this place where everybody else is on the battlefield. But you're going to put down the sword. You're going to crawl away from the battlefield. You're going to go into this space in your peace, and you're going to say, "I'm safe in here, and I'm safe in here, and I'm relieved in here also, because I know that this is just I'm not going to be in that battle. And even if I'm here by myself for a while, the richness of what I'm able to gain from this understanding, allowing the deep to open up to me in the way of looking at it really clearly, traveling with the advocate and understanding that slavery is disengaging some of this fear, and then the flame of inspiration can begin to ignite. The flame of inspiration, the divine genius will not visit you, will not hang out with you, will not be your friend. The deity field you will be in shadow of, unless you guys are my guys are saying be careful with this. Unless it's you that's showing up. unless you're showing up as you. None of those higher energies are interested in a performance of how you want to be perceived. That's going to be your envy right there, and the tyranny as well. You know where you are. The deep that opens up. You're going to go into that place of prayer with that openness, with that space. And it's a space of like, I am drowning. Of course you are. It's a battlefield. I am lost. Of course you are. None of this makes sense. You're not fighting for yourself. You're fighting for somebody else's agenda. You don't even understand why you have to be such a good soldier and show up for work every single day when the world provides for everybody if we were to just figure out how to allocate the resources. Like, you don't even understand, why you're in service to this war god's edicts. So that wealth comes with this understanding that the way that we begin to relate to each other, actually relate to each other, is by admitting that there's a lot of work that has to be done around what it even means to relate, and that you can rest in the knowledge that you're right. It's not safe out there, and it's not safe in a lot of different ways, but it is safe, to open up to the depth of what you're dealing with. It is safe to look at the situation as it is, and to begin to build this foundation on a judgment that says, this is too much for me. This is too much for everybody. I'm not gonna die here. Everybody isn't gonna die here. We're gonna have to start to unload, and that unloading is part of whatever the truth and reconciliation part of, once we admit, like, we're all slaves here, we're not gonna exploit each other. We're gonna stop that. Exploit each other is everything from using someone like a milking cow, to just placing them above you or below you for the purpose of you figuring it out how to place yourself. Like, that's not about a direct connection. That's about proximity to power. Like, this isn't your fault. Like, everybody's been screwed up this way. And so when we understand, when we move to a greater place with this, it's like we've got everything we need to start to form real connections around this, acknowledging where we are, who we are, and it's not in a competition. It's in communal subjugation, and then beginning to communicate with what it means to move around that space with each other is, again, building a foundation on a judgment call that says no more gaslighting about loneliness. This is a result of something that has very little to do with me, but I'm going to work with it in a way that begins to form the connections, begins to operate from this place of a different kind of wealth and a different kind of relating. And so with that, let me get some cards from this deck here. Because that Knight of Cups talks about what you actually want. I love this. You know, I was writing this thing and my guide showed me this thing about how, because I'm doing this whole thing with like masculine, feminine energy and the spectrum between, and like the alchemy of it all, and just trying to find a language around it that helps us get rid of those gender role shackles, you know, like it's just, and one of the things that my guides were sort of explaining to me was that we don't see anybody, very few people see examples of somebody operating in their divine feminine energy in this world, with the exception of 2 examples. There are 2 examples of somebody operating in their divine feminine energy, and it's not what you think it is. The people who are operating in their divine feminine energy in this world, moving around, doing stuff, are going to be the children and the very old people, the people that are not in the labor years, because the labor years, that you have to survive years, are about being on a battlefield, and you cannot be in that battlefield safely in that divine feminine energy. You literally just cannot do it. And so, like, when we understand that, you know, the rise of the divine feminine aspect of God is less about, you know, a gendered approach, you know, to spirituality, and more about having to create this bridge, you know, between what is mandated by way of living under, you know, in a war God's world, you know, and what it means to emancipate yourself and overcome that by working from the baseline of we've enslaved, and so we've all become slaves. The first person to engage in taking territory, conquering it, holding it by way of another person's body, by way of a portion of land, because that's the body of the mother. That very, very first like sickness, you know, entered the bloodstream. I just lost I just kind of like got really overwhelmed because I actually saw like sickness like enter our bloodstream, but that sickness that entered the bloodstream, you know, has really disengaged us from what we really, really want. Like, what is I have to like pivot back. Because I basically, sometimes if I see something that kind of jars me, I'll like lose the whole channel, because I'll just like kind of just flinch out of it. I want to see what that is real fast. Gentle, gentle, gentle. Be gentle with yourself. Make a covenant, you know, not to like use, you know, to have a right relationship with that self that comes from a place of advocacy for yourself and a place of advocacy with others, and a clear-eyed view of the beneath that is open to you, but also a clear-eyed view of the position that you are in right now that is essentially sort of safe. Do you still have to go on the battlefields and earn a living every day? Yes, research and investigation says that that's where you can use some level of strategy to know that like you can be in this field, but you don't have to be fighting on the field. You can be hiding in the tree trunk. That can be where you are right now. And so you kind of like can work, you have a lot of freedom in the way that you work with the environment and the rules of engagement that you're under the tyranny of. But that's the flame, you know, that's where the inspiration comes in. And so here's where I have to be careful, because I got knocked out of it. And this is why. The divine genius is like a relationship to the gods within ourselves, and channeling that into the world is, again, that's true inspiration. True inspiration does not engage with, you know, a a competitive field, okay? True inspiration and all of the new and novel information that comes up through that does not participate on a competitive field. It doesn't exist on a competitive field. Real inspiration, if you have any competitive mindset, if you have even a drop of comparison and competitive, in the soup of something that you're trying to create, that inspiration is not going to come through. You have to remove the competition from the whole process in order to even begin to access and use that muscle of connection. And so it's not like the divine genius is punishing you if you are, in some kind of a, competitive field, of performing competence or something else. Like, you're allowed to, like, your guys are basically saying you're allowed to be in the learning process with all of this. But comparison, competition, envy, and tyranny is going to ensure that you're not getting access to those channels of divine inspiration. And so when we disqualify that stuff, when we put down the sword, it's to connect with the divine. That's just it, because you can connect with the divine aspect of the war god, but then you have to do what I've been doing and what I started this reading talking about, which is stay in the advocate all the time, but you also have to stay in an emergency all the time to do that. And the warrior, has a really hard time bringing themselves home without bringing the war into their own homes. And so that becomes the next part of the warrior's journey that, necessitates this transformation from the tyrant to the advocate because of the role of the father in that place. And so there's all sorts of like archetypal stuff that like works themselves out as you go through this process. But for you to step out of the war is for you to start advocating for yourself and for people and being very vigilant if you're operating in the energy of envy. Very vigilant, and walking away from those patterns and being very vigilant if you're operating in the energy of tyranny. And that doesn't mean something that you're doing like to a person. You can be like the spirals in your head, or the spirals in your head, a tyranny of this person is not seeing me right and I want them to see me right, so I'm going to do like these 18 things. Tyrant. But that's your tyrant, you know what I mean? You don't have to be in a tyrannical place. You can be hanging out with the divine inspiration of the divine genius because you've removed that fracas from your operating system. And so like it's an invitation to just do something very, very different. And that also means that you can show up in relationship with the people that you are attracted to for one reason or another. You know what screws up attraction more than anything else is like nerves. The judgment that you bring to yourself, you know what I mean? When you go to enter a space where you want to, impress somebody is out of control and then you never even say a word. That's envy. Like, you know what I mean? I don't want to say it. I want to be really careful about that, but that's what that looks like. And so there's all sorts of like sneaky things that keep us from like actually having the connections that we feel drawn and called towards. Because, while like admiration, putting someone on a pedestal or putting someone below you, every single person you put on a pedestal, as soon as you get within a certain proximity of that pedestal, because of the nature of envy, you're going to have to put them below you. And that's going to be what the interaction is about. And you are never going to get what your guides and what your inner compass is positioning you to receive if that's what you're doing. Because the call that you are feeling, when you notice an archetype that is calling you, that you have it like that is attracting you for one reason or another, that in one way or another is inciting inspiration or limerence, that's probably someone that you should be in orbit of, that you should be friends with. But their guides are going to never let you near them. Their guides and your guides are never going to let you near them if you're coming with envy or you're coming with tyranny. And as a result, every time you go in orbit, you're going to have a nervous freak out. And so your guides are basically saying like the ways that these things operate within yourself to keep you from the bounty of what would naturally be otherwise available to you is this conditioning, all these operating programs around being good enough, or being seen clearly, or being really seen. And your guys are basically saying like, just put down the sword, put down the armor. We're all enslaved, the beneath opens up to us, and we're able to be resting in that understanding as we investigate our way into better ways of communicating and connecting. We're carrying a lot of burden here with the 10 of Wands by actually coming into this place of like true judgment with this, but then we're able, in walking away from all of the matriculations and the mechanisms of disconnection, start to build a foundation to actually begin to connect with others. And you have to watch all of that conquering, acquisition, holding territory stuff with everything, and also watch envy and tyranny. And if that stuff is at play, and if that stuff is in your way, your guides are saying, step 1, disengage from it. Step 2, go towards the relationship that's calling you. If you don't have comparison and you don't have a judgment here around like positioning and proximity to what you're perceiving as power or desire, then you can very easily be your best self. You always are. You know when you have like a crush and you can't even like say a word, and you don't understand why you're like this awesome, amazing, hysterical person with your friends, but with the person you have a crush on, like you're literally incoherent. Your guys are saying like that's envy and tyranny. And it's a mechanism of disconnection, and it's a mechanism of keeping you afraid of people, because that judgment that you're anticipating and the disappointment that will ensue has nothing to do with the person that you're crushing on, and everything to do with that system of comparison and that system of ranking and that indoctrination around romance that is acquisition, conquer, and hold the territory. That's a poison. But that doesn't mean that you have to be like in some polyamorous, like you don't have to have like no rules relationships. It just means that you understand like what's going on, so that you can begin to heal around what it is to not relate, what it is to be in disconnection, what it is to have gender roles to perform in order to even get to like a place where there's communication. All of that stuff comes around being afraid of each other and necessitating roles to like even make contact, because the fear of making contact is so great that you need all of these rules of engagement and these strategies and these battle plans in order to like initiate. Like that's not it. Reality and walking away from that is, man, we're all slaves to this, aren't we? Like, you're just as lonely as I am. Let's rest with that a while. It's not really safe to connect on the battlefield, but the courage here and the understanding here about the work, and that the flame is always protected, and that the investigation and research that we do, because we already recognize that this tower isn't going to hold anyone, is to begin to bring in messages of truth and reconciliation that move us from a place of stuck in a perpetrator-victim archetypal structure, which is hierarchical, and into a place of you have everything you need to transform this from something that disables you into something that empowers you. And the way of doing that is understanding that incidents of trauma, when they happen without witness, wound, whereas incidents of trauma, when they happen with witness, transform. And that witness can hit the light of day by way of conversation, by way of something you post. But that's kind of what we're moving into in terms of this position of the advocate, around this notion and this knowing with this beneath opens up, that we are all slaves, and this commitment we have to changing this dynamic for ourselves and everyone else. It's kind of cool, right? You're not powerless to this loneliness. We're just gonna look at it what it is. We're gonna look at its face, how its face looks. And we got to root. We're rooted in the wrong soil. We're rooted in the wrong rules of engagement. We're rooted in the wrong exchange, measurement mechanisms. And we need to root in desire. And our desire is not to exploit. Our desire is not to be positioned the most special princess. The desire is to be emancipated, to be free. And in that freedom to exist in harmony with others, and to grow and thrive, not just yourself, but everybody. Because a system of comparison is designed to defeat and to be defeating. Whereas a system of cooperation is designed to facilitate expansion and creation. And so I was gonna say group number 1, but I'm just gonna say morning hangout friends. I'm gonna throw this up. Maybe. I'm going to think about whether or not it needs to be an enrichment. I'm going to look at my schedule because I got to find out whether or not my guides are having me do these earlier in the week because they want me to be working on things a little differently. So the last reading that I posted as a Sunday enrichment, I announced that it's going up on a Tuesday, and I'm like 2 seconds from announcing that this is going up on a Wednesday, but actually I'm pretty sure that this is going up on Sunday. So I'm going to converse with my guides about that, but I do want to leave this here. I'm excited about the information that has come through thus far. We are in this point of change because the beauty of like the magic of revelation, the beauty of the magic of revelation with the Wheel of Fortune is like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see that we are all slaves, and when you look at Hailey Bieber, who is, you know, enslaved at the level of in the house versus enslaved at the level of in the field, and we understand that it's very easy for her to gain favor with the master by mimicking, you know, the songs of the field, and because the songs of the field are where the soul, you know, is creating of in community, and that energy doesn't have access to that, and so that energy has to find their inspiration through the suffering or the tragedy or the experiences of others, and that energy isn't in touch with their suffering and their tragedy. And now it's really easy to look at Hailey Bieber and say, you know, that blind privileged bat, you know, banging against the closed windows of her prison is in more agony than I am out here singing these songs of soul, able to connect at the level that I'm able to connect because of the battlefield being a lot more hospitable than whatever that proximity of power is providing in the way of illusion. And then it's a lot easier to not feel defeated by proximity of power and to look at it like, maybe this is not how I thought it was. And if I understand that where I am is maybe not that story structure that has me bound to despair and has me bound to defeat, but in a different story about an advocate, then you can sort of connect with what it is to be rooted in desire. I desire my emancipation. I desire the emancipation of others, and so I'm not going to waste my time throwing stones at a bat trapped inside a glass, you know, house. I'm gonna invest in the songs that emancipate me from where I'm sitting, and probably in one way or another lead to Hailey's emancipation. And I'm gonna stop thinking about this as being property, and I'm gonna start thinking about this as being a world where within it, we have a lot of power to create our way out of stories that bind us. And so there's a lot about spiritual technology that we can bring into that process in community, in connection to each other, with this technology, spiritual technology of the personal witness, with whatever I'm going to Google in like 2 minutes because I have some sense of it. It's like a trial. Let's look at it. Let's Google truth and reconciliation. But I'm sure that I have some sense that it's about taking the narrative and like putting it out on display and forcing people to reconcile with what is there. I'm again, like, I'm having learning disability problems around like getting more than just like like all these little things that lead to it. But I think that's okay. I think that my guides kind of wanted to bring through some of this because like sometimes our disabilities end up being our superpower. That's for me. Part of my brain like working in a weird way when I'm trying to communicate and I have to communicate in like 6 different directions towards the point that I'm trying to make. Yeah, it makes me look kind of like what's going on with this person. But if I stop thinking about the way that others are judging me, and I stop demanding that they see me clearly and in a positive light, and I just communicate that this is what my process of a communication looks like, then there's some reconciliation about me being able to express that truth and somebody else being able to receive it, and us being able to disqualify a competition that would have us strategically, I guess it's like tragedy and strategy, strategy and tragedy, strategically looking at each other, kind of powerless to whether or not like we can be trusted. So all of that is to say, we gotta do some work here with this 8 of Pentacles, this walking away, and this 10 of Wands is the battles that we fought, and won, and the battles that we lost, and the stories that go with those battles, and the way that they weigh us down if we are enslaved to, you know, whatever that structure is conditioning on us towards. Like, look at the way that she's bent out, or down, picking up. You know, it's almost like she's picking up all this wisdom, but this wisdom accumulates on her back as a weight if there's no way for her to share it. And so I think the desire becomes about sharing. And when the desire becomes about sharing, and there aren't really safe places to do that, there's no despair. There's just, let's figure this stuff out. And so, yes, we're going to leave it there. And I hope that that was helpful, and I will see you guys again soon.